And we're back, and it's COMP305. It's for the winter 2016 semester. It's week 2, lesson 2, part 4. I can't believe it. So we've talked to death about setup, about tools, about stuff. Finally, you can get to going. I want you to start off a new project in Unity. So the way to do that, of course, would be to go to File, and I'm going to go New Project. It's going to take you to this window again in Unity 5. Notice how there's 2 options, 3D, 2D. Now, on the game that you're going to make, the tutorial that's online, they chose 3D, right? That will not do for us. We're going to choose 2D. So please choose 2D. For asset packages, one of the options is to choose an asset package where you can choose cameras and environments and different things. I'm going to ask you not to choose anything for now. Just leave it blank. You can always add assets later, right? So again, for those people who are just coming in, brand new project. Let's name this thing. I'm putting it under my desktop, right? And again, I can put it wherever I like. One place I like to put it is in my desktop. I have a place called Unity Projects. So that's where I like to put my projects. This is where I put it, Unity Projects. And in my new project, I'm going to call this thing COMP305. We're going to call it Winter 2016. And we're going to start off with something called the Mail Pilot build, right? So Mail Pilot, right? And what this is the latest version of the Mail Pilot game we're going to make. We're going to make a 2D game from scratch. I'm going to show you how to do it my way, and then you're going to see the tutorial online as well. Okay, so create project. It's going to open up an empty project here. And again, something to note, we're going to work on this one. This is the same document we're going to work on today and next week, and probably the week after as well, right? Only because there's so much to cover and not a lot of time, right? Notice there's some differences when you first kick off your project. One is there's no skybox, right? So that's changed, right? In my scene, I have a flat camera that looks in like at a square. On the left, I have shaded, and on the game screen, as an example, I have free aspect. That makes no sense for what we want to try and do. We're going to make a game that's 640 by 480, right? So we're going to change this. So what's the first thing to do, right? What's the first thing to do when setting up your project from scratch? What's the first thing you do? So one thing I like to choose is my layout. So even though this layout is the way it is, and if you haven't had a chance to do that, notice you can save your layout. I have a layout, and I'm using something called, FPS, right? My FPS layout. It looks like this. Now remember, you can make your own layout. I'm just using this layout because it's convenient to me and it saves a lot of space for us. So you can see this larger area here. And it also includes things like animator, animation, all the windows it remembers. I want you to make your own layout that you're going to use every single time. Okay? And remember, how to do that is if I want to make a new layout, I can save my layout as an example and call it something else, right? So whatever I want. Okay? So if you make changes, it'll remember your layout. And it'll save meta tags in order for you to do that. Okay, I'm making a new project, so it makes sense for me to kick off a new a GitHub project at the same time. So we'll do that. So I'm going to say github.com. And if I go back to GitHub, I'm going to go into Centennial College. And this is going to be a new project here for Centennial. So I'm going to say plus new repository. And under Centennial College, I'm going to make my repository the same name as my project. So COMP305. And it's a winter 2016 for us. And it's going to be Mail Pilot. Okay, cool. And I'm going to make it a public repository and press create repository. Now, in Unity, one of the challenges that we have is we don't have, unfortunately for us, we don't have great version control support for the free version, for a personal edition, right? Now, there's other, if you had the professional edition, you could use Perforce and other version control systems out there, but unfortunately we do not. So we have to do everything either by hand in a terminal window, or we can download the GitHub desktop tool, whatever you decide to use. Okay. In order for me to make it work, I've got my basic project. I want to add a couple things here to get going, right? So what are the things I want to do? I want to make my folder structure. That's the first thing. And I'm going to add them in here. So I'm going to, on the right-hand side here, where I've set up my project files, I'm going to bring this a little higher so you can see it. Right click, and I'm going to add some folders. So the first one again is scenes. You've seen this a couple times. Scenes. Then right click and add a new folder, underscore scripts. I'm using the underscore key so that they appear at the top of my folder hierarchy. Right? Create new folder. This time I'm going to make one called sprites, right? Because sprites make sense, you know, for my stuff, because we're doing 2D gaming, right? So sprites is important. We're also going to add in some other things like prefabs. So I'm going to say new folder prefabs. We need a prefabs folders. Prefabs. It has to be named prefabs like that, right? What other folder should I add in? So prefabs. Normally in 3D we'd have materials, and we'll see that we may or may not need that for 2D, right? We could have animations, and if I was going to make an animations folder for this one, I'm going to right click and add a new folder, and I would call this whole thing animations. Sometimes we may want to put our animations in one folder to keep it separate. Remember, in a real life game, you have thousands of assets, even for 2D, right? And you need to keep your stuff organized, or else your assets will run away with themselves. Okay, that's enough for now. Let's start off with those, and we can add others later, right? In our scenes, notice how our scenes is here. I want to double click, and I'm going to right click and create a new scene. That's one way of doing it. I can make a new scene, or I can go File, New Scene. And if I do that, it's going to ask me where to go. As an example, if I file save my scene, right, it's going to ask me where to put it. And I want to put it, of course, in the right location. I'm going to go into Scenes, and we're going to call this scene Main. That's a good way to start. Save. Okay, we need some assets. And I want to have some sprites in here. And I've got some assets for you up online. So, but before we do that, let's connect with GitHub, right? So back to Unity, I have some basic stuff. I have a main scene. It's empty right now. There's nothing in the main scene. If I go back to scene, there's nothing in there. And if I scroll out, notice I only have a main camera. I don't have, in 2D, I don't have a light. How come? I don't need a light, right? You don't need a light in 2D because 2D doesn't have shading. It doesn't have, I don't have shadows. I don't have any of that stuff. So in 2D compared to 3D, right? Remember the question I asked you guys in the quiz was, in 3D, what are the two things it starts off with? A light and a main camera. In 2D, hint hint for next week, what are the two things? What's the one thing that you start off with? Only the main camera. You need a main camera, right? Or else you don't have anything. All right, so we got our main camera here, and if you notice, that's what it's looking for, right? So we've saved the scene. Let's close Unity and create our repository. So I'm going to quit Unity. And the reason why I'm doing this is because if you keep Unity open, it locks certain files. And then you can't upload them to, you miss some stuff in GitHub and it won't work properly. So how do we do that? Well, by far the easiest way, I'm going to kill Space Shooter for a second because I don't need that anymore. By far the easiest thing is if I have my Unity projects and I kind of open it up and I've got this new Unity project, I'll kill that too because it doesn't make any sense, right? I want to grab this mail pilot project and I want to kind of go into it. So I want to open up my command prompt, or on Mac machines, my terminal, and I'm going to click CD space, and I'm going to drag my Unity folder, which is this one, onto my command prompt or terminal, and press enter. So it's CD space and the name of my folder. What this is going to do is going to take me into that folder directly. I need to do this for GitHub. All right. Now you need to have Git installed on the command line, and some of you have done this already, right? So you'd want to do something like this: Git init on the command line. If you don't have Git installed, for some of you who haven't been able to do that, you have to get it. And the way to do that again is you can go to github.com, you can go to desktop.github.com and grab the tool, the desktop tool, which also comes bundled with a Git Bash program, or you can download it directly from. If I go download Git, you can download directly from git-scm.com, right? For Mac users and Linux users, it's built in. So I've done a git init, and now I'm going to add all my files by doing git add dot. Notice on the Git site, it says git add readme. I don't want to add the readme. I want to add dot. When I add dot, it adds everything, all changes, and then press enter. And then I'm going to say git commit minus M, and I'm going to call this the initial commit. Initial commit, and the initial commit is just a message to kind of put a message to my my current snapshot of my files. So press Enter. So that adds all my files and provides a message that's linked to that to all those files. Notice there's a lot of files, right? After I've done git commit and I've done my commit, I've done my add, everything is staged and ready to be sent to the cloud, right? So now I'm going to copy this line and I can type it in if I want to, or I can copy and paste. If I copy and paste, press Enter. Now I've created a link to my remote repository on the cloud in GitHub. So I have my local repository where I keep all my files, my remote repository in GitHub. And now I'm going to push to it, and I can certainly copy and paste, or I can type it in. So git push -u origin master. And what it's going to do is take my local files, push them out to the remote. Okay, cool. When I look online now in my GitHub, if I refresh, I have my GitHub up online. I have all my files. So here's assets, library, and project settings, and these are the files that go up on GitHub. Notice that when I go into my file folder itself, going back to this, now if I was going to look at COMP305 W2016 mail pilot in the operating system, if I double click, it's almost identical to what you see on GitHub now. If I click on assets, there are some changes though. If I click on assets, if I go to assets, notice how I see scenes, scripts, animations, prefabs, and sprites, but on GitHub, I don't see those. I just see metadata. Why? These are empty. And our scene right now, scripts, animations, prefabs, and sprites are empty. And Git does not put empty folders up online. Only folders that have content. However, there are some hidden files here. The meta files, these .meta files are hidden. And they're the ones that go up online. Okay, so you need those because if you were ever trying to load this thing up, you'd miss these folders. It wouldn't load up in your scene. That would be bad. Okay, so we've done the Git piece is done. We're ready to go, and we can always go back and stop recording and everything else and put things up. And if you want to look at what I've put up, if I put a script up and you want to follow along, tell me, hey Tom, stop, push to Git please, and then I'll push to Git, and then you can see what my script is. Yeah. Oh, you just okay. And that's what I recommend you do. Okay, what if I want to readme? I can always add a readme here and pull it back down. And if I was going to do a readme, so you know what it is, I can click readme file now, and I can say, you know, COMP305, winter 2016, mail pilot, example 2D shooter project at Centennial. And then maybe for assignment 1. So I've got this file that I'm creating online, and I commit my new file. Notice I have an extra commit here with a little bit of what this thing is about, right? And I need to pull it down. I'm not up to date anymore because up online, I'm 1 commit ahead. I have 2 commits. Look at on the commits over here. If I click there, I have 2 commits. My initial commit and my README. One was done locally. The other one was done online. I want to be caught up. And the way to do that, of course, is to pull my the latest version of my commit down to my local repository here. And the way I would do that is, if I let me clear the screen here, is to go git pull. Once I git pull, I get the file from online and it comes down locally. And now when I look at my files, I see that I have assets, library, project settings, and a README file. Even here in my operating system, here's my README file. It's the same one that I have online. So I can push and I can pull from GitHub. If you're working with a partner, it's a handoff, right? I'm working with you, you do your stuff, you push to GitHub. Before I do my stuff, I pull from GitHub. I grab your stuff, work on it. When I'm done, I push to GitHub. You're ready now. Now you pull from GitHub. Do your things, push to GitHub. And that's how it should be done. That's the easiest way. There's other ways to kind of collaborate with your partner and create other branches and merge the branches. They're way more challenging, and if you don't know what to do, it can mess up your files. Yes?
Okay. So before we need to pull, at least we need to download the 1 version of it, right?
You should load the latest version for yourself. So if you know your partner's working on it, you might as well download what he's just done. If he's not stopped, it's a check-in, check-out system that I'm suggesting, right? It's the easiest way to go. All right, so I've got my GitHub going. Let's set this stuff up. I have another another repository here under Centennial College called Mail Pilot Assets. See if you can find that for me. So Mail Pilot Assets. There's Minimap Assets. That's not it. And if I scroll down, there's going to be another one down here called Mail Pilot Assets. And somewhere down here. Here it is, MP Assets. There it is, MP Assets. This is September 21st last semester. So go there. Notice there's audio, fonts, and sprites. Hey, those are two things we forgot. I forgot to put fonts and audio, right, in my assets. Okay, so again, go to Centennial College and go to MP Assets. Now, here's what you can do. You can fork me on GitHub. If you click fork, it'll duplicate this project in your GitHub. So you don't have to look for it on mine all the time if you want to reset your project. Okay, so if you click fork, it'll actually create a copy of my project within your GitHub account.
But will it update every time?
No, but this is just the assets, so it won't need to update, right? All right, so if I want to download these assets, you click download again, and I'm going to put these assets on the desktop somewhere, and click save. So I've got my assets. I unzip them, right? And let me show you what those look like. Here's my assets. And I'm going to talk about these things. We're going to build my game out of the assets, right? I'm not going to start you with 0, right? So here's my MP assets. I'm going to get rid of this. And in my assets master, I have some audio and fonts and sprites. Now there's a couple ways to import from Unity. One way is to drag and drop, and the other way is to do it through the operating system. And Unity will pick up the new assets and import them. Okay, so let's do it the operating system way this time around. So the way to do that is to go into your Unity project without it being open, right? And go into Mail Pilot, this new one we made, and notice we have assets folder. Here's my assets folder. And I have a couple of new things. I have sprites, so I'm going to go double click on my sprites, and these are all my sprites I have. And I'm going to double click in the folder here of sprites. Notice there's nothing in there. So this is your main Unity project, and this is just your assets. And I'm going to drag and drop all this stuff, other than don't drag and drop plane 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, you know what? Let's just do it. Let's just drag and drop everything. There we go. Oops, undo that. For me, I got to copy paste because I'm on the Mac. Copy and paste. You can drag and drop. There we go. Okay, cool. So we've got my assets here. Now notice Unity is not running right now. Okay, and now there's a couple folders that I don't have. I don't have audio and I don't have fonts, right? But let's drag and drop those anyway. So I'm going to drag and drop audio, and I'm going to drag and drop fonts. I'm doing this all in the operating system. Let me undo those changes. So again, I can also, the right way to do it on the Mac is to copy paste, because otherwise it'll move stuff from one thing to the other, and I don't want that. There we go. Okay, cool. So I've got my stuff done. I've got my MP assets finished. I don't need this folder anymore. Bye-bye. Right? Get rid of it. I've got all my assets here anyway, right? Now I want to start Unity. So let's do that. So I'm going to go back to Unity and start it up. Now, you might have a second when you start it up. When you click on COMP305 W2016 Mail Pilot, it'll take a second, and notice what it's doing. It's importing the assets right now. Look at it. Here it is. I've just imported my assets. And if I look at my sprites, I have a bunch of stuff in the sprites folder now that I didn't have before. And the same thing goes with my audio. I have audio files I didn't have before, right? And I have my fonts I didn't have before, my Doc51 font that we can use. Okay, cool. When we set up this project, we can't use this free aspect. Okay, if you look under game, we're going to make a pixel perfect game, not the way they make it online. If I was just going to recreate the game they're going to show you online, might as well do that tutorial and forget what I'm doing, right? So I'm going to show you something different. So I'm going to make a pixel perfect game. In order for me to do that, the right thing to do is change my game to the aspect that I want. And I want to change it to 640 by 480. And the way to do that is I already have a preset, but for you, all you have to do is go plus. Under free aspect, you click plus, and you can choose your resolution. Take a look. Notice that there's fixed resolution or aspect ratio. I want you to choose fixed resolution, and I want you to change these values to 640 by 480. 640 width, right here, by 480 height, right here. Then name it, give it a label, like I just called it Mail Pilot 640 by 480, and press OK. When you do, you're going to get another preset here. And notice that my screen now becomes the size of my game. This is what I want my game to look like, 640 by 480. Are you with me? Okay, so that's one. My camera, though, isn't really 640 by 480, right? And I want to add a new object here, right? Now, there's a couple ways to do that. If I was to go into sprites, right, and I was to grab my ocean, that's the first object I want you to add in there. Here's my ocean. If I was to grab the ocean and drag and drop it into my camera like this, or into my view, notice how it does two things. It creates an object, right? It creates an object right away. My object has a sprite attached to it called ocean, right? And the actual object itself, the game object, also is called ocean. Notice how in my assets folder, it didn't create any other option, anything else. So just under my sprites is ocean. There isn't an additional anything else. So that's one way to do it. I could just do drag and drop into my hierarchy, and it'll create my ocean, and it'll add a sprite renderer component to it. Okay, that's what it's done. Notice how my camera is looking at it this big. That's quite big, my camera, right? I don't want my camera to see it this big. Notice on my game, that's what I see. That's not what I want. I want my camera to match up with my scene. How do I do that? Any ideas?
Select the camera.
Let's check the camera. Okay, so check the camera. So my camera is a couple things. I have a skybox right now that says, clear flags, skybox. We'll talk about clear flags. Leave that alone, right? Notice that my projection is orthographic. Orthographic, right? Orthographic means that it's looking at it in a flat view. It's not perspective like we're used to. It's just an orthographic camera that's just a tunnel that we're looking at, right? It offers a few different complexities when it's orthographic. Also, one more thing to notice is, notice my depth is -1. -1 in terms of layering. That's how my camera is going to see things. Okay, if I click on my ocean, however, my layer, order in layer is 0, right? Order in layer. So order in layer, hint, hint, this is going to come up on your test next week. The order in layer gives you the order that each of the objects sit inside your view. So if I have an object on layer 0, it's going to be at the bottom. If I have an object on layer 1, it's going to be on top of that object, and so on, right? Right now, I only have one object and my camera. My camera's at -1. Talk about that in a second. Okay, but let's go back to my camera for a second. My camera needs to change. I can't leave this projection the way it is. And notice how my size is 5, right? My size is 5. Well, what if I made my size 100? So if I went to like 100, what would it do? Well, it would make my camera really big. So if I scroll out, it's like this big, right? So that's not what I want. So 5 seems to be right. So go back to 5. And now if I zoom in to my ocean, now it's way down there. See it way small? How do I zoom in there really quickly? No, F for frame select mode, right? I can scroll in by pressing one button. If I want to scroll more, I can do more and go in there. There's a bit of a problem, and I'll tell you what it is. If I click on my ocean itself, not this ocean, this is my game object. This is my component. It's my sprite that's being added in as my game object, right? Two different things. If I click on my ocean, notice on the right, it picks it up as my texture type is sprite, 2D and UI, right? That's what it is. Okay, that's good. That's a good thing. Unity interpreted it correctly. Here's where it made a mistake. I want to make a pixel perfect game. What's the pixels per unit mean? Pixels per unit, right? Remember we talked about Blender units and Unity units. Unity units doesn't exist. We use meters, right? So if I have 100 pixels per unit that means it's every unit, every one is worth 100. Is that what I want when I want to make a pixel perfect game? What should be the ratio? 1 to 1 is what it should be. So change this from pixels per unit, change that down to 1. Okay, filter mode. Change this filter mode for the ocean from bilinear to point, no filter. okay? You should see maximum size. Now for Unity 4.6, you might see the maximum size something like 1024. Change it to 2048. Leave it at that for me. So these are some changes you have to make here in the game, right? Sprite mode, single, multiple, or polygon. Single is okay because there's only one single sprite we're looking at right now. And again, there's other options here. You may have other options if you're using Unity to Unity 4.x, okay, than this. But this is what you want, 1 pixel per unit, and you want the pivot to be the center, right? We're going to talk about this in a second, and we may want to change that for our ocean for a second, and we'll talk about why, right? Why you don't want the center being the pivot, right? Okay, and let's apply. Click apply. You can't make these changes unless you apply. Apply. When I do that now, so I'm like, oh my God, it's huge, right? Why? It's 100 times bigger. This is the ocean now, right? And my size from my camera is 5, right? Here's the quick fix. In order for me to match up my ocean with my new camera that I'm going to make, I want to make it so it's half the height. What's my height? 480 pixels, right, is my screen. That means I make it half the height, which is my size for my camera is now going to move to 240. Let's try that. Doot, doot, doot. Right? Notice how it's perfect. Right? And when I go back to my game, I see that it's perfectly aligned with my game. So what do I want my ocean to do? First of all, let's rename this thing. Ocean with a lowercase o. It just doesn't fly for me, right? I want to rename this thing to ocean with a capital O. So there's a couple ways to rename. You can click on the hierarchy, and on the right here, you can rename it, right? Or you can click and click. That's another way to do it really quickly, right? So I want to rename it just like this. I want to say ocean and press enter. And when I do that, my ocean has a different, it's got a different name to it. Notice how my position for my ocean is 0, 0, 0 for my position in the game world, right? But if that's 0, 0, 0, how come? Well, because my pivot is the center. My pivot is the center, right? Pivot for my option for my game. So think about this is this thing here that I've got. How big is my ocean? Like how big is this thing? It's definitely more than 640 by 480. And why is it so big? That's the question you have to ask yourself. Well, let's try this out. If I started my ocean, I'm just going to start over here for a second. Notice the units change on the Y perspective, right? If I move this out to 480, right? Notice here the units are 480. This is where my ocean should start, right? 480 pixels. Watch. Then what happens is, as the game goes, I want the ocean to scroll. This is what the effect I want. This is my programming, all right? And as my ocean, right, reaches a certain point, take a look, right, where the top of my ocean meets the top of my screen, I want it to reset back up to here. What is that going to do? It's going to give you that fake scrolling effect, right? By the way, it works the same way side to side or up and down. You just have to switch your orientation, right? So that's what my code. That's what I want my code to do. And in order for me to do that, whenever I make a code for a piece of for anything, I need to have something called. I usually try and call it a controller, right? Now we may want to change this. If an example would be this: if I was to reset everything back to normal. So let's say if I reset, I go to the gear, and I reset, it goes back to the middle. This is the pivot. The middle of my entire ocean is the middle point where everything can turn. If I was to rotate right now my whole ocean, right, as an example, I can rotate it across. That's across my pivot. That's what it's rotating across. Undo. But maybe that's not where I want my pivot to be, right? Maybe where I want my pivot to be is the top left corner of my screen, of my ocean. And you can change that. If I go to Sprite, my ocean itself, and instead of center, I can choose top left, right? Notice when I go back to, and if I apply it, notice how this is the center now, right? This is 0, 0, right? Now, that may not be what I want either. Just letting you know, right? Some people may think this is the right thing to do, but not so. If I go back to main camera, or if I go back to ocean itself, the ocean, notice that it's still at 0, 0, because the center of my camera, right, is the pivot's at the center, right? I'd want my camera to be offset to make the pivot on the top left. right? Because my ocean and my camera are, they will kind of work together. So I know this is what you want to do. You want to make it the top left corner of your screen. Don't do it. Leave it as is, and we'll talk about it in a second. Let's go back. So go back to your ocean, and instead of being in the top left corner, the pivot, make it the center, and apply. Now your image is going to go back to normal. Where I want this thing to start from the beginning, though, is at 480, right? So if I go back to ocean and I click my Y position, and notice I'm only using X and Y, I want to change this to 480. And the reason for this is because when it starts here, right, I want it to move down approximately 5 pixels at a time every frame. Remember that I'm moving down 60 frames. My frames are 60 frames per second. And remember that update function I talked about last day? It's going to trigger 60 times every second. So if I move 5 pixels every frame, how many pixels am I moving down every second? How many? 12 pixels? If I move down 5 pixels every frame, and there's 60 frames every second, how many pixels? 300. How big is my screen size? 480, which means every second almost, I'm moving this whole thing down 1 panel, right? There's 3 panels. 1, 2, 3, right? That means every second, almost every second, I'm moving it down whole panel. Let's move this back to 480. That's important to understand, right? So that's my code. Now we're running out of time. Is there another class after this? Give me 2 minutes, and I swear to you, I'll put together a piece of code that'll make sense to you, all right? So how do I add a piece of code to this? Now, last time we did it the way we did it before, right? So I'm going to add a component to make, I've got my ocean clicked, and I'm going to add a component, and I'm going to go down to new script, and I'm going to choose a new script, and I'm going to call this thing ocean controller, right? Capital O, capital C, and press enter. It's going to be C#. Now it's going to appear in my assets folder like this. And I don't want this to be in my assets folder. I want this to be in my scripts folder. So I'm going to drag and drop my ocean controller into my scripts folder. It doesn't make a difference here, right? Okay, in my scripts folder, I want to double click my ocean controller to bring up my default editor. In my case, it's MonoDevelop. In your case, it might be Visual Studio, depending on what you've chosen as an external editor. Double click. Okay, so here's MonoDevelop when it comes up. And notice that when I come up, I have my ocean controller script, right? It's called ocean controller, right? And again, I'll tell you that it's going to be different. In my start method, I want to make sure that when my game starts, that my position, right? My position for my object, my camera, on the y-axis starts at 480. How do I do that? Well, I need to have access. In order for me to modify my where the position is, my transform, I have to have access to the transform. I need to make a reference to that transform to make it easy for me to access it, because otherwise it's a very long piece of code to access that transform. So let's do that. In my start menu, or before my start menu, I'm going to create a private method, a private instance variable. Let's do this. So here's a private instance variable. In my private instance variables, I'm going to name this thing transform, and it's going to be of type transform with a capital T. So it's transform, and I'm going to make my variable, I'm going to call it underscore transform, lowercase, right? So I've created a variable. That's how you do it in C#, right? Type, name. It's not private until I put private in front of it, right? That's what I should put. My access modifier should be private, so it's not going to be showing on the inspector. Only public variables show on the inspector inside Unity. Private variables are not shown. Okay, good. I want to create a reference to my game component. How do I do that? Well, I do one of these. I say this dot underscore transform, right, is equal to, and then this is where it gets hairy, game object, lowercase, dot get component, right? And then what am I getting? You have to put in brackets the kind of component you're getting, which is the transform, and then your open close brackets. That's the syntax. Okay, cool. If it's the transform that I'm getting, I have access to the whole transform component. So that means now I literally have made a binding with my transform variable to this component. Well, if I want to change my Y position, what would I do? I got to do this, transform.position.y, right? You would think, and you'd be wrong. You cannot modify a transform component directly. You have to assign a vector to the component to make it equal. All right? This is how you do it. So now I want to make it so that when I start my code, I want it to move to 480 pixels. I want the whole ocean to move up to 480, to start off every single time the same, regardless of where I ended up, right? How do I do that? Well, I want to do this. I want to say this dot underscore transform, right? Dot position is equal to a new vector2 object, because all I need is vector2 x and y components, right? Vector2 has two, inside of it has two properties, and they're both floats, which means I got to use the float component. So x is the first one. We're not changing that, 0, right? And the second one is a float y, which we're going to make 480 f, right? So what this is going to do is going to say, take my position, create a new vector2 object, because it has two components, x and y, and assign it to my position. I'm not doing a direct assignment. I'm creating a new object, and that object is being assigned. I can't assign individual components. I can't go transform the position.x is equal to, which we'll call this other thing .x. I can't do that. It'll error out. Don't try it. Okay? Okay, cool. Let's try this. So if that's true, right, and if I've attached my script, if I run it, it shouldn't give me an error, and it's not going to move anywhere. Okay, and if the way to test that, let me just unmaximize on play for a second. The way to test that is if I go back and I play, right, here's my thing, but if I go back to my scene, notice that it's right here. It's 480. It didn't move, right? How do I know that it's working? Well, let's move it, right? So I start off here, but let's start somewhere else. I'm going to click on my scene. I'm not playing. I've got my script active, and I'm going to move this down with this control here. I'm going to move it down somewhere in the middle, random, right? Now let's play. And theoretically, if it's true, it should move up to the top. Yeah? Let's try it. Play. Okay, where is it? It's at the top. Okay, if I stop, it's back to where it was. So it physically moved my ocean. That's the first step. My ocean's at the top, right? In fact, what am I really doing? I'm resetting my ocean back to the top. And if I'm going to reset my ocean back to the top every single time, I'm hearing method. Method is what I want to do. I want to create a method that I can call every time I want to reset my ocean, right? Because I don't want to type in transform is equal to new vector, blah, 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 blah. I don't want to do that again, ever, right? I want to do it once. So back to code. And then I'll let you guys go, I promise, right? So that means that this piece right here, not this piece, this piece, this is just us making a reference. So this is, make a reference. That's what we're doing here with the transform component. That's what we're doing. We're making a reference, a binding, if you will, between the two components. The variable name, the transform variable, and the component called transform inside our game object. Game object lowercase refers to this object here. Okay, that's what I want you to do. You can also use this .get component. It would be the same. All right. So this is cool. So I want to make a new method. Well, remember how we do methods. Here's our method. It's void, and we're going to call this method reset with a capital R, right? And inside our reset component, which is going to be public, right? It won't appear on the inspector because it's a method, right? We're going to do this. We're going to take this, cut it, and put it down here because that makes sense. And in my start method, I'm going to call my reset method. So I'm going to say this dot reset. I use this keyword every single time, even though I may not need it, right? Just to indicate what I'm resetting. So call, reset the ocean, right? The ocean sprite to the top. That's what this is doing. Okay, cool. Well, in my update method, right, I want to go down a certain amount, a speed, if you will. let's make the speed variable public. So it's going to be available on our inspector. So we're going to say this. We're going to say public on the top here, public instance variables. And inside of public, so we'll make it public, right? We're going to call this what type? Float, right? Because it would be a float. And my public float variable is going to be called speed, lowercase, right? And we're going to set the speed by default to 5, right? Just as a default value, right? We can also do it in our start method. Okay, so here's our public speed, right? What I want to do is this. Every frame, I want to make a new vector2 to add 5 pixels, right, to the original location of my thing from the last position, last known position, right? 5 pixels, which means I need to have a current position, right? The current position of my object, which I can read, right? So I take the current position and then I add 5 to it, and then I take that current position, which should be a new vector, and add it as a new vector to my old position. That's what I need to do, right? So how do I do that, right? Well, there's a couple ways I could do that. I could create a private vector2 object, right? So let's say private vector2. We can do this up here too, instead of making it anonymous like we did before. And we could call this private vector2 object current position, right? So current position, right? So my current position as a vector2 object takes 2 components, x and y, right? So I can do something like this. So every update, get my current position. So I'm going to do one of this. So I'll say this dot current position, which is a vector2 object, is equal to what? Is equal to this dot underscore transform dot position, right? Because that's the current position. Remember, the position is actually a vector2 object that belongs to the transform. So all I'm doing is saying take that position and add it into and make that the current position. So that's the current position of my ocean, wherever it is. Right now it's 480. Now, remember that speed of 5, I'm actually subtracting from it. So I'm going to go 480. I want to subtract, because maybe it goes from 480 all the way down to minus 480, most likely, right? So 480, I want to subtract 5 from it every frame. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to go down here and say this dot current position, right? Minus equals to, right? What? Speed, right? And the reason why I'm not putting 5 and I'm putting a speed is because if I go into the inspector, I can change the speed right there as opposed to putting a hard-coded value. Cool, so my position has changed, but it's just a vector, right? It doesn't mean anything. Hold on a second. Speed is only a float. That doesn't make any sense, right? Of course not. I need to make it a new vector. So I'm going to say new vector2 object, right, which is the x component, which is 0, and then the y component, which is my speed. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense, right? Because I'm adding 2 vectors together. One, there's 2 components, x and y, right? Okay, cool. So I'm subtracting the speed from the current position. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to do the swap. I want to say this dot underscore transform, right, dot position is equal to this dot underscore current position. What am I doing? I'm saying subtract 5 from it and then attach it back to my whatever the transform is. That's the new position now, right? There are many ways to do the same piece of code. I'm breaking it out to make it easy for you so you can see it for the first time. I could write it on one line, but why? Okay? So this is how it works out. Sorry, guys, if you guys have class. Anyone have class? You're overtime. All right, good. One more thing, and I'll make this work. So this is going to go, right? Well, let's check it out. Let's see if it works. So save everything and run it, and then see what happens to our position, right? So you should have a bit of a scroll like this if you're going to, but then something happens, right? Oh, man, my ocean ran out. Well, what really happened was here it is in my scene. It just keeps going, right? I need a boundary check. I need to make sure that when this thing goes from here all the way down to here, look at the value, probably minus 480, right? So when it's equal to or less than 480, call reset, right? That's my boundary check. Let's check this out, right? So let's go back to my my monodevelop here, and I want to do that. I want to say, let's check in my update, right? I'll say like this. I'll say if, right, this dot underscore current position, because by then we already have the current position is equal to the new position, right? If this dot underscore current position is less than or equal to minus 480, then what do I want to do? I never want to, by the way, just put everything directly. I want to use curly braces for everything. This dot underscore reset, or this dot reset. Reset. I want to do. Okay, so now when it goes less than 480, flip, it's going to just go reset to the top. You should see very little skewing. And this is the challenge when you do a scrolling background. This is the first thing you should always do. Make your scrolling background first. Let's check this out and run it and see if it works. So save, go back here, and press play. Oh man, what happened? Huh?
Yeah, it's a vector. So
what happened? I know, right? But okay, so current position minus 480 doesn't make any sense, does it? Right? It's not current position, but I can test y. I can test y. So I can go comma dot y. That would work as equal to less than or equal to 480. It's just checking a condition. That I can do. I can't check the whole vector because I've got two components, x and y. But I can check. I just can't assign. All right? Just FYI. Doesn't work like that. Now let's try and see what happens. Okay, so I play, and then I have my scrolling background, and it should scroll forever, right? Over and over again. It's going to scroll forever. So it looks like a scrolling ocean, like you're flying over the ocean. Let's see what's happening on the scene side. It's doing this, right? So if I go back to my scene, this is very interesting what it's doing. Look, it's going down here, and then, boop, it's going down there. So remember, one thing I want you to take away from today, and we'll stop recording for today, right? Games are all smoke and mirrors. It's all tricks, right? It looks like it's a scrolling ocean that's scrolling forever. But the reality is this, right? It's going down and resetting back up. And we're going to reset, in our game, every component that you see. If you see an enemy, you destroy it. What am I doing? Resetting it to the top. And then it's going to fall back down. So I'm only going to ever have like 3 or 4 enemies. But it's going to look like I have, unlimited amounts. Okay, same thing with bullets. It doesn't matter. This same concept can work with 2D and 3D, right? Why? Because if I work with 2D, I can reset it off the stage. And with 3D, I can reset it away from the camera, somewhere you can't see it. 1,000 miles away, same thing. You won't be able to render it because the camera can only see 1,000 units away from itself, right? Anything outside the camera range, invisible, right? It's a trick. And we do these tricks all the time to reuse our objects instead of loading new ones. Every time I do an instantiate, I create a new object, it takes cycles for my CPU. And it makes it that much harder to use. All right, it slows the game down. Questions before we stop for the day? Yes? That is my best practice. That is my convention for private variables. You don't have to do it. I'm asking you to do it for private and protected variables. Every time I do a private or protected variable, like for example, current position and transform, I'm using the underscore to indicate that it's private. So if you ever look at that variable, you know, hey, that's private, okay? Yes? I can't hear you. Come closer. Everyone's talking now, right? Yes.
So how does it know we are talking about ocean?
Because this ocean controller is attached to the ocean inside of a script component. Anything that I have attached to it, it knows it's referencing that object. Okay? Yes. Let me just stop recording. Otherwise, yeah, it's